So but what you're looking at is sort of fits one of the points I wanted to make, which is that webwork is just constantly ongoing development. And so this is a movie made of its development for a 10-year span. It's built out of, like any multi-person software project, there's a version control system where changes get committed, and someone was able to go through the log files. They wrote a program to go through the log files of the version control system and make a movie where it shows. So these are all little dots or files that are part of the webwork source. So you can see, this thing, if you've been here since when I started the movie, it started small and it just sort of has been growing and growing. And then all the people who have been making modifications, those are the little people floating around and showing zapping files. So like Abe Pizer, who's just faded away and while they were engaged, they were the two originators of webwork back in the 90s. They're both still with the project, although Pizer retired something like 8 years ago. So he retired as a faculty member, but he still helps out with webwork. So also notable DVPs. I can't read what his login name was, but that's David Cerrone. So he's also known sort of in the mathematics community because he's the creator of MathJax, and before that, JS Math. And before that, a lot of the parsing possibilities that take place inside webwork.
So what are you?
So I'm JJ, which someone, I think Beth mistook as being just a J because
well, it's kind of small. There it is. There are two J's.
Okay.
For whatever reason, it capitalized the first letter because my login was just a lowercase JJ. So I think that was true for everybody.
Yeah, it looks like it capitalized it. I like the one that's just A though.
There's
Is it really just A?
There's no just A.
So it's A something. We
There's
can
an
see
A
the second
Pizer.
letter.
Again, that's Arnie Pizer. So this is Gavin Lotos. He's the one who created Gateway Quizzes. Anyway, this was just there.
I've been to the eye doctor several times this semester. Thank you. I'm scratching my cornea. We'll blame it on all the cornea sprays I've done this semester.
So I wasn't sure how much people would know about webwork since we've, at ASU, been using it for over 10 years, although at first it sort of started in one course, and then we grew to many, many courses, and then there was a big contraction. So if people have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer questions in place of whatever things I prepared to take up time here during in case we're not. But here's some basics as to what webwork is. So it delivers math homework over the web, checks answers so you get immediate feedback. Students get different but isomorphic versions of a problem. So that way, it's has multiple assets, although I guess it's now common in many, or maybe even all homework systems, that they try to do this because then students can, it's a hedge against cheating. Student gets the answer is 5, another student may have an isomorphic version of the problem, but for them the answer is 6, and so they can't just copy answers. And then they also encourage that maybe you encourage your students to work together to figure out how to do that type of problem, and so sort of facilitate cooperative learning. Students can get a downloaded PDF of their assignment so they don't have to do everything at the computer. I think this is not used nearly as much as students should. There were times, I don't know if anyone still does this, but where people would insist that the very first problem set that students would have to make a download of the PDF, print it out, and bring it to the instructor to prove that they know how to make the PDF to encourage them to do that. But now that students will attempt to do this stuff on their phone, which you can do, but it would drive me nuts. This is about the size screen that I like.
And look at my problem. Why don't you send me an email and I'll look at it?
Yes, exactly. Hit that button. Let me get my reading glasses.
Students can send an email to the instructor, although you can, like many things in webwork, you can control them. So they're, especially at first, it seemed to me they were like over compensating for trying to make things configurable. There are just so many things already that are configurable, that were configurable in webwork around 2000, and now it's even more so. So there's tons of things that you can adjust. So I think you can turn the email thing off. For instructors, you can the instructor can control when assignments are due, what time they're due, when the answers become available, how many attempts students get, how many points each problem is worth. There's places where you can view in different ways how your class is doing. So you can look at a particular student and see how they're doing on all the assignments. You can look at an assignment to see how the whole class is doing, student by student. You can get statistics, all sorts of ways of looking at how people are doing. And of course, you can download grades into a spreadsheet. So things it's not, so I don't have a slide on what webwork is not because it'll be a long slide. But
you can easily
you
download grades.
can click and you get a spreadsheet. So it's not a content management system. It's not meant to deliver entire courses. There's a bridge that works with Moodle so that in particular, if you have a webwork problem, you can create an ordinary HTML link that will go directly to that problem. And for a student, if they click on the link, if they're logged in here at ASU, just generally to ASU, then they go directly to that problem page and they can work on it and enter their answer. So it can be integrated in that way via links with other systems. One of the strengths of webwork is I think all the answer types you can have. So it tries to grade problems the way a teacher would. So this was, from the get-go, it was designed by 2 math professors, and they wanted a system that would grade problems the way they would grade them. They started in calculus, and so in calculus, it's maybe especially true where you have a derivative problem and you really just want to know, can the student apply the derivative rules and get to some form of the answer, or not can they simplify it down to the most simple form. And so they wanted to be able to accept many different variations, to maybe there would be different ways in which you would apply the rules, so the answer might come out in different forms. So it tries to accept any form of the correct answer, and of course tries to reject any form of incorrect answers. But you don't have to program them all into the system. So as opposed to, there are some much more limited systems not designed by math people where you have to put in every possible string that a student might enter, and then there's all sorts of extra constraints typically on a problem of you have to do such and such. Just as an anecdote, my son had to use one of these other systems last year, and it was just, I found it infuriating because the question would say, simplify your answer. But as you know, simplify is not a well-defined term in mathematics. So I'd be looking at it, and so he only had 3 attempts on each problem. So he didn't want to burn attempts, so he would do it and have an answer, and I would first check to see whether I thought the answer was correct. But looking at it, I looked at the answer, well, I would think simplified would mean this, but I'm guessing they mean this. And so we'd have to guess and what they thought simplified meant, which is just seems to be nuts. Answers. So early on, they had, of course, you can do string checking, and checking numbers is relatively straightforward. And then functions was one of the earlier types of things you could check. But then over the years, so this is past, present, future. So over the years, more and more types of answers are allowed. So you could have a set, student puts curly braces, list of elements. You can have a union of intervals, say you want to know what's the domain of a function. You can have students enter it more naturally without sort of giving away any part of the answer. You can have a point, so it will check points, it will check vectors. Vectors can be, and this is many things, configurable about what option to allow, but you can have, if you're using vectors in 3 space, you can allow IJK notation, or angle brackets, or, and again, you can configure what you'll allow for entering a vector. Or you can have a list of any of the above. So you can have a list of functions, so if you have, and again, as it's expanded out, things have changed, so starting calculus, but then in algebra, maybe you don't, maybe the whole point of the problem is to do some simplification, so maybe you have a polynomial and you want the students to factor it. You could ask for the list of factors, and that's a list of functions, and it could check them, and it doesn't matter what order the student puts them in. It would check to see if the list matches the list the instructor gave. You can have units where the system does unit conversions, or you can make it not do unit conversions. Again, lots of things are configurable, but...
so for instance, you can insist on foot pounds or let the student give the answer in inch pounds and it will convert.
Exactly. For matrices, there's a syntax for entering matrices, but I don't know if I've ever seen a problem use it, because the concern is you confuse students if they have to make some entering a matrix is more complicated than entering, you know, for example, point, because you have to have some way of distinguishing rows of the matrix. So usually it's just in place. It's a fill in the box where the boxes are in place in the matrix and the students have to fill them in.
I've taught 242 for a long time, and I've never seen a webwork problem where you enter the matrix directly.
Yeah, like I said, I'm pretty sure it exists, but
I didn't know
I
it
don't think
existed
so.
until today.
well, you think about whether that would be better. Again, I'm pretty sure it exists, but I don't think anyone would use it. Flexibility. So again, any form of function is okay unless you don't want that, because everything's configurable. So you can restrict the answer checking stuff. For example, you can rule out specific trig functions or all trig functions, because maybe the whole point is you want the student to evaluate sine of pi over 6. And you don't want sines or cosines in the answer, because that would be too easy if you allow them to type sine of pi over 6, because normally that would be allowed. So you can have it check the answer but not allow the sine function, or allow any trig functions, or all sorts of things. For example, as they move down into lower level algebra, again, a simple question is, here's something, a product of polynomials, you want the students to multiply it out. So there's special answer checkers that will check if the polynomial is correct, and because it can restrict which operations it will allow, it can make sure that it's in the form constant times power of x plus constant times power of x, and so on down the line. It can also check answers where there is no unique answer. For example, antiderivatives was an early example. So there it's up to n of constant, or you can have a question like, here's a matrix, give me an eigenvector. Or give me an eigenvector for 5, and maybe it's, well, even if 5, assuming 5 is an eigenvalue, there would be infinitely many answers. Or it could be a 3-dimensional eigenspace, and still you can ask, give me an eigenvector for 5, and it can check that is, you've done the correct thing. Or again, linear algebra, if you have a vector space, you describe some subspace, ask for a basis. It can check to see whether the student's answer is in fact a basis for that space, even though there's infinitely many answers and not sort of trivially deducible from each other, like just a simple constant multiple. Problem. So initially, Gage and Pizer were there probably the night before, writing their problems so that they could assign them the next day. I don't recommend that. Some people still do that. But now webwork comes with a library of, so it's roughly 25,000 problems and an interface to browse them. So work is underway to improve this. If you have questions about that, you can ask me, because that's it's one of the other points of the original video at the beginning is webwork is like a huge thing now, and so I'm highly expert on various parts of that and less expert on other parts because it's so big. So one of the things I'm expert on is the problem library, so I'm especially able to answer questions on that. But say you have a problem see a problem in the problem library that you like, but there's some small thing about it you don't like, it's easy to make small adjustments. Naturally, to make bigger adjustments is harder, and super big adjustments might mean totally rewriting do something totally different. That gets a little harder, and the more complicated you want things, the harder it gets. But certainly small adjustments are easy, and then if you're so inclined, you can learn how to make bigger ones. If something goes wrong, so not to say that this is constant state of affairs, but the system was, again, originally designed when people were, reprogramming the system just to get it going, and they were writing problems on the fly just to make available to their students. So they built in safeguards from the beginning. So for example, you can take a problem set, if something that seems really bad, you can just hide it from your students so they're not encountering the problem. You can delete a problem for the whole class. You can give everyone credit for a problem. When you delete it, for example, if it's problem 3 out of 10, you can make it so that the problems go 1, 2, 4, 5. 3 is gone, but everyone else is in place, so they're not confused based on they have a printout. 4 is now changed, so it wouldn't change the others. You can give everyone credit if something is wrong. You can change if one student, there's something funky about their version of a problem, you can change that student's version without changing anyone else's. And there's lots of logs being kept. So for example, every student submission of an answer is kept, and the instructor can go back and look for a given student and a given problem at every submission that the student made. So this was useful back when I was running our server. Then I was the sort of like last line of defense, student would say, oh, this system doesn't work. I've been entering the right answers and it's not giving me credit. So they ask their teacher. Usually the teacher would be able to deal with that, but sometimes it would then come to me and I would go look and sometimes they were just like crazy wrong. But because I could look at everything they submitted, I could tell, oh, this is not even close. And then I'd wonder why the instructor didn't pick this up. But because you can look at everything, then it's easy to deal with questions of that sort. And you can optionally have it log more things. So you can have it log every single time a page is generated and get that information. So we sometimes would use this when a student said, I submitted my homework on such and such a day and time, and we could see for that user, that course, what was happening at that time, and did they in fact click the submit button.
So is there any way for those logs, to lose something in those log files? Because every semester the students, I don't know what happened, all my answers were resetted. Of course I tell them, this is impossible. But just want to double check with you.
To do what with the log files?
To lose some,
to lose them?
Yeah,
Information in there.
some information that is in the log files. Is it possible for it to get lost?
No.
Disappear?
Not unless you delete the log file.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, it's a,
It's a log.
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
But, just double check.
yeah.
You can say, no, you really didn't.
No,
And that's what I do.
You haven't logged in since.
That's,
But
yeah.
So practicing. So one of the features from the get-go is you can add what are called guest users or practice users to a course, and this can be used for students to get extra practice. So anyone can just click on this guest login, they can see the problems. You can have the same problems that you use for your assignments, you can make different problems. You can adjust when the answers are available. So for example, one use people have made is they would have an assignment for the class, but from the get-go, they would have you could have 50 practice users, and then each practice user has a different version of every problem, and you can make their assignments just for the practice users so that the answers were available from day one. So this sort of mimics this feature of a other system where you can look, students have one version of a problem, but they can go and have another version where the answers are available. Some of our problems have solutions built into them, and so if the solutions are built in, then the solutions would then be available for those problems. So if you like having solutions, then it's just a matter of having someone write up the solution and sticking it into the problem. You can also now have problems where there's a button, where the student can click, and it makes a new version of that problem. And so this can be done for the initial problem set, and you can control when this button appears. So it can not appear until the due date comes around. And then, so the student has to work on their version until the due date comes, and then they can get different versions for practice. Or you can make it appear when the student gets the problem correct. Maybe you don't have to wait till the due date. As long as you've gotten it right, then why wait? Or you can make it there always. If you want to make it so that students can, I don't like this version, click. If you want that, you can do it, yes.
So would we still be able to see their original version of the problem when it comes to the answer?
You'll see, I know they're doing something with the answer log, so they're updating the answer log facility, so we'll be able to tell what was the
What
right
the
answer
problem
at the
was.
time. Yeah.
So,
But not what the problem necessarily was.
Well, it would store the seed, and if it knows the seed, then it knows exactly what the problem was.
Okay.
can you do a combination thing, like after it's correct or after the due date, whichever?
I imagine so. This is not a feature I've used,
I didn't know it was
so
there.
but I heard about it and so tried to look a little bit, blown up a little bit for this talk. And there's work in progress for things like problems that automatically reseed after a certain number of attempts. To me, this sounds like some sort of torture that math professors inflict on their students. So people are working on it though. I just sit on the other side of the room from. But they're working on that, or the
It
type of thing.
discourages random guessing, that's what it does.
I know,
What
Yeah.
you're supposed to do
so-
anyway.
Yeah.
It's very frustrating to, they've been working on it and they think they're getting closer and then suddenly their problem changes on them.
Yeah, it would
They-
probably
that's
depend
very
a lot on the problem.
frustrating.
Some where it's a really long process and you're trying to figure out if you missed a sign somewhere in the middle, that would be cruel.
Yeah,
If it's something that you should be able
got
to.
several students in my calculus right now will tell you how frustrating that is.
So there are also people working on making bunches of problems with solutions and the reseeding capability, so to exactly mimic the My Math Lab behavior. Again, it seems like a bad idea, but some people want it. Gateway quizzes, these have been around since I don't know, about 2005. So the idea is you have a limited amount of time to do the assignment. They're versioned. So not only does different students have different versions of this, but you can allow them to go through again, but when it's a quiz, it changes the next time they do it. So if you're going to allow, this was designed, say, for mastery testing. So Michigan uses the Harvard calculus sometime early on in, by now it's early on in the Harvard calculus progression. They thought, well, students don't know their basic skills, so we should have mastery testing on basic derivatives and integrals. So that's what Michigan wanted it for, and so that's where gateway quizzes came from. So the idea was the student would take it, and if they didn't get a high enough score, they'd have to take it again, but now it's a new version. They do theirs in a proctored computer lab, and so you can ensure that a proctor logs in as well in order for the quiz to be active. You can present more than one question on a single page. So normally in webwork, you see one problem, you do it, go to the next. So here you can have like looking at a whole quiz, all the problems at once. You can make problems, either you can use the randomization multi-versioning of a given problem, or you can say, pick from this list of 20 problems to be problem 1. So you can do it that way. You can restrict grade related data to show the students. You can require specific computers or labs or IP addresses. So this is, again, the Michigan usage. They only want people to be able to do it. They don't want people to fake out the system. So you have to be in their computer lab in order to take their gateway quizzes.
John, question.
Yeah.
The pooling, can you do it problem by problem? If I want to build a test with, say, 5 problems that should be picked randomly for problem 1 from one pool, for problem 2 from a different one?
Exactly.
Okay.
That was, in fact, the initial only way you did gateway quizzes. And then they enhanced it so it could do the random seeds each time the student took it. At this point, more likely you'd want to use the seeds, but you use just a single problem that can itself generate all the versions you like. But it's sort of historically, that's why they can do the problem 1 comes from this bunch, problem 2 from this bunch. Yep.
So there are times, of course,
Yep.
it would be very nice to have a timer like WebAssign has, and it's not there. Do you know if they're working on it?
I don't know, but I'd say there's, again, with the theme of it's sort of constantly ongoing development, people are responsive. So, if someone wants to program it, then they're really happy to have it. But otherwise, they certainly take input, suggestions as to features to improve. And so that sounds like it probably would not be too hard.
That would be
Especially now.
useful, because I've had a couple say, oh, but it said this was the time on my webwork
Because they
page, and it's like,
refreshed
but
it.
that's only when the page was refreshed.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yes.
going back to, historically going back, there was a push not to use JavaScript in webwork. That they were worried because at the time some people didn't trust JavaScript, they didn't have it enabled, so they didn't want it in the interface at all. Now things are like totally switched around, and so the next version, big version change in webwork will be much more like, you go to Facebook and the page updates by itself. So webwork will be like that, where pages, it will speed things up because when you do things, you don't have to re-render the entire page. It will just update a little piece of the page as needed. And so you'll have a little JavaScript clock. It'd be one of the simplest things to put in.
That is one of the complaints my students make about when I give them quizzes this way. Is they don't know how much time they've done with it.
Yeah. And also another thing, sorry.
Sure.
When you give a test, all the problems must have the same number of attempts. So, if I want to put a true false, maybe I want to give, of course, 1 attempt, but for a free response, I want to give 2, so it would be nice to be able to choose different number of times for different problems.
Oh, I thought I could.
You can do it.
Yeah, so, well,
I thought I could do that.
No, you can't in a gateway.
Oh, I have to turn that in the gateway. No. I thought that was written in the.
some of the things which are sort of newer things, the first one is old. So they did have an example of where, and depending on time, I can show some examples. So JavaScript in problems where you're told there's a function, but you don't get a formula for it. Instead, you get a little thing to click on where you can put inputs and it will show the outputs. And then they ask questions like, at 5, is this function continuous? And so the idea is you plug in points on both sides, or it asks for a one-sided limit, or it asks for the derivative, but where you have to produce the numbers yourself.
In other words, an impossible problem to actually solve.
Recently there's been, Flash is being used, so there's some game-like problems. Maybe I only know one that truly seems game-like. But using Flash, they have some now where you can have the student draw the graph. So they use the mouse to draw a graph on axes, and then it grades whether that's close enough to what was expected by the teacher. You can have students identify key points. So it draws a graph, and you have to click on the critical points, and that way, again, can students ask? You can ask certain questions which are more, maybe a little more natural way to answer them. There are 3D problems with 3D graphs and controls that you manipulate, and sometimes you have to manipulate this 3D thing into some particular position in order to answer the question. So those are, I don't know, they're kind of cool. I don't know if I use them. There's also the Sage bridge. So this is something that's just being worked out. So Sage is a free open source computer algebra system. So there's now a webwork Sage bridge where inside problems, it can access this computer algebra system. So in a particular problem, you can use it to construct the question. So for example, someone pointed out, well, if you wanted a 5x5 matrix of determinant 1, but where you want the coefficients within some bound, webwork doesn't have a good way to do that. You can do it yourself by some mechanism, but it would be easier to just have Sage, which has a command to do exactly that. So ask Sage, give me this 5x5, because maybe you have a matrix and you want students to diagonalize some 5x5. So you start with a diagonal matrix, you conjugate it by something of determinant 1, and now you get nice integer entries and can ask the question. So you can use it to construct the question, you can have it check the answer. So you can, again, because basically it's how the webwork problem gets to call Sage and with a command, and Sage responds. And so you can have it, if you want to ask, are these two expressions the same, you can send the difference to Sage, ask it to simplify, and see if you get 0. You can, some of these graphics ones, they're using Sage to produce contour plots or 3D graphics and updating it as you move the sliders. It keeps on going back to Sage to redraw the graph. So there are problems where it does that sort of thing. And there's more. Essay questions. So this is a relatively new edition. So it's sort of odd that the big claim to fame of the system or purpose was you have questions and the computer could grade the answers. And then you could get this fast feedback and whatnot. But they've now built in the facility where the computer does not grade the question. So there's a text box and the student has to type in their answer, and the students have some rudimentary facility for typesetting things, and they use backticks around math, and then it will sort of typeset it when the instructor looks at it. The instructor goes to grade the problem, they can see the various student answers, they give it a grade. They can also comment, and when the teacher is commenting, they have like the full typesetting for math because they can type in LaTeX, and it will get typeset when the student sees their comments. Achievements. So here students earn badges, like trophies in modern video games. Pong didn't have trophies, but so here you're doing something, it always seems to be like a totally random thing you do, and then you get a little emblem that will appear. So some of the things they have are, you get 10 problems completely right, and that's worth a badge. Or you get 5 problem sets where every problem set is all 100% correct, and that's a badge. Or they have one, if you complete a problem set between midnight and 2 a.m., Then you get the night owl badge. So anything you can think of, you can put in there and create badges. And so they're not worth points, but they may motivate students. So while I myself was another feature, I just won't go off. I don't know why they're doing this.
Badges? We don't need no stinking badges. Hey, someone was gonna say it.
I noticed that I have a Starbucks card because if you, it's a way you take your coins to Coinstar that gives you a Starbucks gift certificate for the same amount. Then when I go and see how much money is on my Starbucks card, there's achievements. Add money through the web and earn a badge. Add money to your card at a store. Drink 7 lattes in a day.
Does it make you want to get more Starbucks?
And no, I'm not going to do that. But it must work because if they're doing it, it must encourage people to do it. So webwork has this facility. Progressive problem. So this is where you have a problem, and if you solve the whole problem, then part C will give away part A. So here you have part A, and the student has to get that right, and then when they submit with part A correct, part B opens as well, and now they have more to do. And they put that in, and then and you can have as many parts as you want. So the things get, again, opened up in sequence just because you don't want to reveal what's happening down at the bottom based on what happens.
Does it tell them how many parts there are?
I think so.
Yeah.
And then there's help with entering formulas. This has been bandied about since early zeros, whatever, early 2000s. People have been having things that when students, they've typed their answers into an answer blank, but to have a more graphical way of doing it. So there's now, I think, 2 JavaScript thingies that you can have turned on. And so if the student clicks on it, they get a little thing they can click on. They can click on sign, and it will type in the line S-I-N of. So to me, it doesn't seem like a huge thing. I guess someone pointed out an advantage when you're doing things with lots of parentheses and divisions and whatnot, it typesets as you go what you currently have in the thing, so you can tell faster.
Yeah, they don't understand when they get it wrong on the test when they don't have the right parentheses.
So anyway, this is now something which can be turned on and off, even on a per course basis. So if you're site-wide, it's turned off, then you want it in your course, you can turn it on.
I do like the preview, when they can preview what they've typed.
So
That's nice.
that's it as far as slides go. So any questions?
Where are all those controls? Because when Stefania gives us a course that's already assembled, I don't know.
Oh, they're all there. Just go to course configuration.
So first, flip through it. I had some things open up. When I get to a page where I can do that, here I'm logged in as a practice user just to show some problem. So this is 10.3 problem 1, and so you have one set of numbers, and here's a different user, and they have different numbers. But otherwise, they look like more or less the same problem. And which was this one? So here I'm logged in as me. So if I go to course configuration, and
There's the achievement, see?
yeah, achievement point. Oh, I guess you get a point.
But you could do it points, yes.
I don't know. Probably, yeah.
So you can enable course achievement.
So the drag math and math view. So those are the 2 choices. I don't know what happens if you enable both of them, but
They're 2 different ones, right?
they're 2 different ones, yeah. And as you can see, there's various other things you can configure about course. And this whole course configuration page invented at ASU. And example of instructors asking for things, and then they get in there. Initially, log meant log base E. LOG meant log base E in webwork. Lance Ward said, this is not going to work for our class, because for us, LOG is log base 10. And so it was built into webwork that now you have a choice, what LOG means when students are typing in their answers, whether it's base 10 or base E.
And you didn't talk about reduced credit.
I wasn't, because I didn't think of it. So reduced credit, so is that on here? Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
Length of
Length
reduced
of
credit
reduced
period
credit
minutes.
period in minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty complicated.
Yeah, that's
And
So-
minutes, come on.
So I don't know, do you know how, so I assume this means after a certain amount of time, then the student gets less credit?
Yes.
There you go.
Okay.
After a certain amount of time, the student gets less credit.
Value-
If it's on.
If you
Would
just.
you also have to then change your value of the work done in reduced credit period?
So I'll point out another feature. Each of these explains what these things are.
Yes, the one
So-
is.
Yes, that is a nice little feature when you're
And this
doing
tells
it.
you
And
what
sometimes
the
it's
reduced credit
helpful.
thing is, except we're sliding off the side of the page.
You need a second screen there. I recently used it, learned how to do that.
So did I get to the answer to your question, Fabio?
Yeah.
I did, okay.
So, you can add like TAs and et cetera to your class.
Yep.
And they used to be able to pick their level as a number. And now you just have a choice of certain levels, and it seems like there's a huge gap from TA to professor.
That is in the main configuration file. You cannot change that in your
So the,
course.
I mean-
It's a,
I wouldn't worry about the, again, the number is just the word is a placeholder for the number, and
Right,
vice
but
versa,
what
but
I'm
it's.
saying is, the level of, that I used to give my TAs isn't there anymore. If I put them in as a TA, they can't do anything about somebody's assignments, for
So,
instance.
so here's a page where you decide who can do what. And if
yes,
there's some-
but
there's-
what a student can do, a professor can do, or whatever, is decided in a configuration file, which is on the server. It's not specific to the course, right?
No, you can override it in the course, right here.
Well, but what are the things that they can do?
That's what.
Like
That's
So
a
what it
score.
says-
So,
Well,
for
what?
instance,
If there's something
I
that
don't
you
see
think
where
should
they
be
can
in
do
what,
assignments there.
that is not here, then that's easy to add.
Oh, that's right.
I mean, it's not something I would say you should add, it's something you could say, oh, John, I think we should add such and such to this page, and then,
Oh,
Yeah,
so
so
then
for
you
example,
make
So
it
I
say
simply
TA.
say, I want my TAs to be able to do blah, can we make
I don't
that
care
change?
about TAs, I just want to know what.
Right, if you
Oh,
want
it's
to
on
be
this
able
page.
to
Should
change
be on
what
this
somebody
page.
can do.
Right,
Because
I
TA is
see.
an
So if
option.
it's not on this page,
Then-
I can't choose to
then
turn
you
it on
can't
for my
choose it.
TA.
Then
Then
it's
I would have
like,
to say, I would like to be able to choose whether or not,
right.
ah.
So the things over here, I went through a bunch of the permissions, of which there are a zillion,
Yes,
and picked some that I thought people might want to change, and then thought maybe others would pick up the, thing and put more things in as needed.
I didn't know
but-
that we should tell somebody that there might be other things that would
Yeah.
be useful. I, will send you
No,
a
that's
list.
easy.
John.
Yeah, send me a list.
Again, course configuration. Just click on the buttons and see.
Well,
Yeah,
if it's
no,
permissions, then it would be on this,
it
this
would
part
be
of the
here. So
configuration.
for instance, I used to have my TAs assign the problem sets. That's not on there.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, certain
Then I
things.
would, you have to do a
Right.
global change, right?
And so for that, I would just, you
Or,
just have to
again,
add it to the list.
You should tell me, and then I'll add it to the list.
Right, so that
And I
kind
can
of
also
thing.
give you the change file, and you can, if you want, update it on the
Because by
service.
default, TAs are not even allowed to score sets.
Right.
Yes, that's something
Every
good.
time we update, I mean by default I mean. in
Right,
the
so I ended up putting my
configuration
TAs
file.
in basically as professors this time.
So then sometimes I remember I should change that, but then sometimes I don't, so.
Yeah, so yeah, scoring sets, things like that.
Also, that email, that's where you can turn off.
You know, one thing that would be nice for email is if on the course list page where you've got all the students, there was an option to send email to selected students.
But you have the,
Isn't
Because
that-
there's one, if you go to the email page, you can do that, but I don't think on the class list editor, there isn't one.
yes, there is.
There is?
So,
Oh, is it in the instructor tools? No, where was it?
It's on the email page, but if you have several sections and 200 some students, then you gotta scroll through all the names,
You're
and
right.
there's always the chance that you might click instead of control click
Yeah.
and lose all the ones before.
I've done that many times.
So,
And I only have 300.
to be honest, emailing a bunch of the students, the email page seems like the natural place to do that from,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, but
And-
unfortunately, the interface isn't
It's
as
not the
good.
best
So
place to do that from?
you can,
Because
Yeah,
it's
so
very
like-
easy to lose the names that you've checked already. And
Yeah.
if I've got 10 or 15 that I've checked already and I mess up, or I think, well, have I messed up, then I have to go back and check that all over again, so. It would work a lot better on
Are you
the,
telling
as
us
something
there's
as
a
part
better
of the
page to
class
do
list
this with?
editor.
so something I can pass on, the
Yeah.
other thing that's happening there, so almost, it'll be most visible in the instructor tools. So they say they're going more to all JavaScript driven pages. And so the look of every single instructor page is being revamped.
Hmm.
Wow.
So,
I'm gonna get lost again.
well, we're making a change to the current one is not useful
Yeah.
because
Okay.
within the near future, that page will be considered obsolete.
Yeah.
So I would wait until the new version exists and then suggest
And
that.
that actually brings me to my next question, which is what do we expect from the future? What are they working on now with webwork? What are they thinking of adding, things like that?
So
Do you have any word from Rochester? What
Yeah.
they're,
So again, the biggest change is this change in the interface. That,
Okay.
so on that side, changing it, again, all the instructor pages, the student pages probably, the main student pages where you see a problem. And that's a library browser. So the student page looks like that. So this probably won't, aside from, different themes, and they keep saying they're going to have a graphic designer come in and make the thing look better, which I think the ASU version looks better than, this is a more recent version, but using a different theme.
I didn't like that theme.
I think, I
Ours
agree,
showed
I
up
think
that
the
way,
ASU version
ours
looks
showed
nicer.
up that way briefly when we changed the system and it was like, ee.
Could be.
By the way, you can switch to that. I mean, you can change the
Oh, I
theming,
know.
of course, if you
But I
want.
like this theme better.
Yeah,
can students change the theme?
No.
too?
No.
No.
only the instructor. So that's in the course configuration.
Okay.
You can change
Yeah.
your themes.
I like
Because
the
some
theme.
students might prefer other ones, other ways of seeing it, so.
So anyway, here the main change for students will be when they submit, it won't refresh the entire page, so it'll be faster. It'll
Okay.
do the check and then report back and fill in the boxes on the top. What else is going to be? So the different things which are described as far as new types of problems, the things that you saved, these more interactive problems, the essay questions, the achievements.
Yeah.
Let's
I heard about the essay questions. When did they start thinking about putting Sage in
They've
as part
been,
of that?
they've been working on Sage for over a year, so it was
Okay.
helped by
Like
Sage.
you-
The Sage group has these Sage days where they have people come and work on programming Sage. And then they started to have Sage EDU days for educational related things, and so some more
Okay.
people went. So there's several problems. Unfortunately, like the version I normally run, this is the bleeding edge development version. But being bleeding edge, it means that people put in a change and it breaks other things, and then someone has to come and
Yeah.
fix that. It's not meant for
Yeah.
prime time. And so, like the Sage things don't work on my version because somebody has broken something along the way, and it will get fixed before it gets released to
Yeah.
the public.
Will this new version with the new stuff still work with things like the JAWS reader?
The what?
Yeah, so
Jaws reader, so blind
I
students.
think, I
use
don't know
JAWS.
how the JAWS
And
reader works
for
as far
instance-
as the, when a piece gets updated. Presumably they've thought of that since this Web 2.0 has been around now for about 10
Well,
years.
Part of the thing is they're talking about making it work more like MML, but the JAWS reader
It
doesn't
doesn't
work with
always work with
MML.
MML.
Doesn't work with it
So-
most of the time.
And the other thing which would work, to some extent it can work better, anytime there's mathematics in the page, then the recommended default is to use MathJax to render it. And MathJax can produce, so it produces the HTML that goes in the page, but it can also produce MathML. And MathML is what the JAWS reader can read. And so Savone is working on making MathJax do even better. So like have a voice, version that would, because if you read out completely the MathML, for something complicated, it gets back to being incomprehensible. So trying to make it so it can read, you know, a voice version of output from FJAX.
Well, since you happen to have the library browser up there
Uh-huh.
right now, I'm kind of curious. Sometimes it tells me it found, 480 problems, but it only shows me 250.
Okay, so
Why is that?
I'll show you via an example.
doesn't-
Is it
So-
the display mode that I pick?
Nope. So here it's found 95 matching problems for in calculus single variable differentiation definition of derivative.
Just what I found one.
And so on. So if you want to see
By the
different
way,
versions of a
I
problem,
really like the new way of adding them to the problem set. It's so much easier.
Well, I'm not
so when anyone's watching a problem, the problem keeps changing.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
So the reason why you see difference, so like at the bottom it says showing 1 through 5 with 28. So that's because notice this one is in a box and it
Yes.
has an M, and if I hover over the M, it says show 3 more like this. So there are 28 essentially different problems, but there are actually more and they've been grouped. So now these, somebody went through and decided if f(x) equals y and find f prime of true using the definition of derivative, blah, 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 that this was basically the same as this. So you can see them all. And then if you decide, oh, I don't like any of them, well, maybe you don't like this one, so you click the X and it goes away. And then you can close them back up. And so that's why there's a difference, because you're seeing like the number of problems, basic problem types, but a given problem type sometimes has more than one
It
person.
makes the idea of writing those quizzes from pools even easier. Because you have a whole pool.
And the fact that you can see different versions of the same problem also pretty
Yeah.
much wipes out my email earlier this semester where I talked about how in the database it should mention that whether the problems are randomized or
Yeah.
not. Here you can actually see it.
I mean, it's still, it's still,
It's
you know,
still a good
I mean,
idea, I think.
Still on the to-do list, but again, so this,
Yeah, it would be
I think
nice
the
to say
majority
that's
of the
better.
problems which are not randomized would be missed by looking by a shell script. And so then you would run into the situation where someone sees, oh, there's a problem labeled as not randomized. So they would assume anything not labeled like that does randomize, and then it would be
Yeah.
wrong often. Oh, not often, because the whole database, most of them, are randomized, but it would be missing the
Yeah.
bulk of it. So it'd be misleading. So,
Oh, I see. So next time I see that, I should look for an M.
yeah, so, and
I didn't
also
notice
depending
the
on
M,
so I think our version that shows the M, I don't think it has the box, that's a more
I
recent,
certainly never noticed a box,
more
but
recent is.
I could see where it
Because
probably
people
would
asked, they
notice
wanted
the
to be
M.
able to tell when expanded how
Yeah.
far they, so they're
And that makes
lines.
sense. Yeah, I probably never noticed the M.
Yeah, they slip these things in, then it's like you
More or
gotta,
less.
More or less, I just figured that one out.
you have to read through a list of 500 changes they made since the last version, and there's only one in there that's really useful.
Yeah.
Well, there was a big change in the look, and then
Yeah.
part of the
And then
idea
they
was that
certainly
maybe
made it-
people would realize if they were, all of them, if you hover over them, they say what they do,
Yeah,
in case you didn't know right away what the icon was.
but yeah, I find it much easier to add problems and sets now than before.
I have another question.
And take it back out.
Yeah.
instead of-
Thinking of exam building, I had, not with webwork, but very large data problems where there were statistics for many tens of thousands of students who had in various courses in various universities done the problems, and so you get a good sense from statistics of what the performance, if you select a certain subset of problems, will be in your class, and pretty much tune in the grade, the median or mean. Is there any way that one can find that kind of information in the webwork problems?
So currently, no. It's something that people have been thinking about, and how how to implement it so that we have local webwork administrators at the end of each semester go and click a button to send their data to webwork central, and where it would be compiled and then everyone can pull it back, or should it be, how to manage it?
So how complicated would it be to make it internal? Say if we take the problem sets that we use in 1 of our own courses over and over and over, there will be probably good statistics after 2 years, whereas internally for ASU.
Yeah, so you can, it's not that hard to write a little program that for our server would go and pull data from the database, where all the student records are kept in the database. And
Yeah, but
you have to make
what-
decisions about what you be careful, like you don't want, so it's easy, you don't want data from practice users. Like, what if someone, drops a course at some point? Do you
Right,
use
no,
the
I
data for
understand
them?
that, sure.
Or, and do you want just the final result, or do you want, the score and how many attempts it took them to get that? So it's, all of which is data that's there. So it's just a matter of deciding what data you want. And then, but writing, as basically a little command line script that you could run to suck all the data out of the database is not that hard, because that's, you'd be doing the same way webwork itself accesses the database, is because it goes to a Perl program that can read and write the database. So you can write your own Perl program that reads and writes, well, hopefully you don't want to write, that reads the database and just pulls the information. You just have to decide what you want. And also, I guess you'd want to be careful, again, like just thinking of issues, if I were going to sit down and do this, on our server we have some past semesters. So do you pull information from those, or are you just pulling from the most recent? Because are you going to pile it on top of the old data, in which case you don't want to double count, or, right, so, but once those things are sorted out, getting the data out, I don't think is that hard. And per problem, every problem in effect has a unique identifier in the database that's easy. So it's easy to know that this exact problem, all instances of that exact problem, that's easy.
Yeah, the really hard part would be to decide which ones you throw away, because
Right, which data you
somebody
want.
attempted 17 times,
Well, you don't want
16
one
are
where the
wrong.
instructor was trying it incorrectly on purpose.
Yeah, so probably you want to filter out all the TAs and professors and guest users, but then, and I guess maybe also students who are deactivated for one reason or another. If a student drops, then
Do you include that or not?
there's a mechanism so you can make them no longer have access to the course, but you don't throw away their data, just in case there's some mistake or they re-add, or So do you keep those?
So I have a completely separate question
Yeah.
about the copy and paste feature.
There's a copy and paste.
Well, you can
feature?
copy things and paste them in, right?
Okay.
So I had an interesting thing happen this semester, and a couple of people who decided that perhaps Wolfram Alpha would be a better source of doing their quiz than they were.
Right.
And they
And they were
pasted
right.
in their answer and got it wrong. And I went, that's very interesting, why? And they didn't tell me that's what they did. I went, and I said, well, that's a very weird answer that you got. How did you get that? So I went and had Wolfram Alpha do it, and I copied and pasted it in, and you get gobbledygook. Is that an intended feature? Is it because Wolfram Alpha is producing some HTML code or something rather than?
Probably the.
Well, it's a wonderful feature, so don't change it. Second, so my second question is, when you look at the log, is there a way to tell that it was pasted in?
No. The system has no way of knowing.
No way, really.
It's
Yeah,
entirely on
so
the
they
browser side.
shouldn't change the fact that it doesn't like Wolfram Alpha answers. The really sad part was they were asked for the third derivative of a constant.
What do you mean? What did they find? Paste.
Something they got from Wolfram Alpha that didn't, apparently it does look just like a zero when you copy and paste.
Yeah,
I just thought it was really sad that
Unbelievable.
they were so intent on cheating, they just
Didn't think how easy the problem was to be cheating on.
Yeah. That's,
If we gotta have students
Okay,
that
maybe
cheat,
on
make
the
sure they're
first
good
problem
at it.
where, there was was an actual, you know, more interesting function, but on the third derivative one, it really was just a constant, like, do you realize that you just keep getting zero? Apparently they didn't.
I have a question about
Yeah.
Blackboard integration. So right now, when you export the numbers, then you have to check the list of student
Yeah.
matches, right? So it's kind of a manual process. So would it be possible to make this a bit more streamlined?
So, being as far as then re-importing into Blackboard,
So
um,
no, one column for each problem set, and then I calculate my averages. So
so isn't there already one column for each problem set?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, there is, but you have to. I mean, it's kind of a manual process. So
I guess I don't.
checking the list of students
To make sure that
Oh.
it's listed in the same order or something?
Yeah, you have the same problem with the MML stuff too.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
With all of
Yeah,
these.
It's not integrated,
It's
not
because
our.
Blackboard updates who's in the class when they drop it from my
But
issue.
Blackboard does not.
Right.
No,
But
they
webwork
do any of
does
the
it, you
other
have to
drop
one
it. Right,
systems
so
that
But
we
you
use.
have this with every system.
Yeah.
I mean, you could delete them if you don't mind losing the data that.
No, but if you
I
drop,
don't,
if you,
I
No,
just
but-
change your status to drop and then I take away their section.
yeah,
And then, so when I do it, you sort by section first and they're all out of the way. But you're saying,
right. I mean,
but you want
I
it
can
more
do it manually.
automatic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, she's saying you could do it less manually.
Slightly less, yeah.
so each time a student, so I used to do this, each time a student drops the course, you find some way that you can sort them out by, you know, change their
Right, so-
status to drop.
You
and
know
then-
that-
Yeah. So that's what I do manually. I
Yeah.
check the list.
Right, so I go to my ASU and I ask for all those dropped and withdrawn and I sort by status and down at the bottom you'll find the most
Yeah.
recently withdrawn ones.
Fine, and then I could delete them.
Yeah,
And then- yeah.
and then I go and draw. So it's quickens the process a bit. But
Right.
yeah, I know what you mean about the,
when
So
you have
maybe
kind of-
maybe this could be done automatically. So after the
Yeah, that would be nice,
deadline,
but-
I would have a new column
there's so many
in
systems that would
Blackboard
have to integrate
ideally.
that, that's how I could do it.
No. The online My ASU Blackboard system has a different alphabetizing than what.
Yeah, it
we're-
does.
So if you have.
Well, it's different than
AL
Excel
hyphen
too.
or AL space, it will sort
Yes,
them
it is.
differently.
ASU's alphabetizing
yeah.
is
So
different
you've
from any other
got
one
to
I
actually
know.
check
It doesn't match Excel at all.
that they
It
are.
makes me
No,
crazy.
especially when you have
Right. So maybe this could be done automatically.
names with two.
Then the problem.
That's what I
You
mean.
have different systems for alphabetizing,
Yeah.
sorting them.
Last name according to-
So different rules for alphabetizing.
Hey, maybe webwork could add a feature, how to alphabetize in ambiguous cases. That could be another project for him to work on in Rochester.
Probably not that hard.
No, it's just a matter of, okay, what are the possibilities here, so.
Yeah, so it's just a.
Do we ignore spaces, do we ignore the case, things like that, so.
Interface.
Yeah.
My ASU, I had one student that spelled their name all in small letters, they ended up at the very end of the list of my ASU.
Yeah,
Yeah,
It's like,
I don't know why I should.
and
let
someone who
students
enters their
enter
name in all
Yeah.
capital letters
Too,
ends up
then
somewhere else.
I had something funny with the Arabic names, Al, Sam.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
they change
A
around.
sort of-
whether they put a space or a hyphen, or a
Right.
capital letter or a
Yeah.
Or
lowercase
do
letter.
they capitalize the
Most
second part
programs
and
are
the first
sorted the
part?
same
and
way.
It's crazy.
That's how
Ah,
Pick it
I
up
like it.
for me.
That's cool.
I want that problem.
So you still have to work it out, but it helps the students visualize what's going on with the standard fixed volume cam.
I like it. Why don't I have that problem?
This one I want to try. Here you
I
have to draw the
tried this
ribbon.
one, I was really bad at it. And I was looking for problems for mine, I tried that one, I was horrible at it.
So this one's probably beyond our course. But,
That would have been
definitions
so
of
good
continuity
for
and
that.
limit.
No, that would have been good for 270.
Is it?
Yeah.
I don't know if we did epsilon delta. I think
Yes.
in 371 and 370.
No, they do baby epsilon delta
Yeah,
proofs
epsilon.
in, you know, basically we stick pretty much to the lines of parabolas, but.
Here's the little critical points. Probably missed some, so I'll just move on and check it.
Do we just go in for fun problems and then we find all these?
These all come from this CSU, Cleveland State
So if
University.
you just look in the CSU one and find them.
So that's more legal.
Oh, I really.
Oh, here's the
The
classic.
Norman window.
The Norman window. Maybe
There
we
aren't
should
any
just
of my
tell
students
people
in
the
here,
Norman
right?
window problem. Everyone knows
That's
where
what
it
makes
is.
sense.
Looks like it's about
You want to give a pitch for the webwork thing we're doing at the end of the semester here about
So,
recategorizing the problems?
sure. So here in the library browser, so as pointed out, the little M, so that feature is called More Like This. So this project is to help improve the problem library. We're doing a couple of things. So one, like right off the bat, here on the list of subjects, I noticed they're no longer in alphabetical order. So now we have control over what order they'll appear. So that's something that's less commonly used, like electric circuits is not going to be near the top above statistics, say. So we can choose the order, and then we have people who go through, and so we're only a little of the way done. We were working on differentiation and applications of differentiation. And for differentiation, they decided sort of the new divisions of what this should be. So a lot of them are divided by with trig and without trig, because brief calculus courses or business calculus across the country generally don't use trig functions. So it makes it easier for people to search based on what they're doing. And also, in some cases, there are just so many problems, it sort of becomes less useful if there are 300 problems. You don't want to go through all 300.
There are 578 problems.
Yeah, dividing them. So it's first dividing the hierarchy, then reclassifying the problems so that they'll now fit in the new hierarchy, picking out, looking for things which are duplicates. So there are problems which are virtually the same. And so the people then say, this one is a duplicate of that, keep A, get rid of B. And so by get rid of, we make it so it will no longer appear in the library browser, but if you have an old problem set that uses B, it now just redirects to A. So, we should be not harmful, although had people's egos bruised when we didn't pick their version of a problem, and the person picked somebody else's version. But they picked the More Like This, so what drives that, and they also, there's this advanced search page where you can also, some problems are indexed against textbooks, so you can pick it, but now we've added level. So if you click on a little, again, information bubble, it pops open a window to describe what levels 1 through 6 are. It's not simply 2 is harder than 1 and 3 is harder than 2. They were trying to model on Bloom's taxonomy, except Bloom's taxonomy was not so good for webwork problems because everyone was a 2 or a 3. So we just sort of extrapolated from that. So from memory, 6 are proofs. So we have problems which are basically, student has to do a little proof in their head, or there's even one, I didn't find it, but or look for it, but there's a flash one where students have to prove some assertion. There's a list of statements, and then they have to drag them into order to make proof of the given statement. So that would be a 6. One is just complete, memorization. No application of rule, like what sign is higher or 6. So that would be a 1. So again, you can, not only the problems we've been through have levels, but you can reduce your search by levels. So we're doing that at these workshops as well. And I think that's pretty much the extent of what we're doing.
Do we have those levels in our solution?
Certainly the problems have the problems which are classified, which again are only some subset of single variable calculus, because we went through.
No, but I mean, if you go to
Why don't we go to
one of
your
our
course?
courses and click on,
Go to your course.
So
Oh, that's a new class.
this was a test class that's defined you made.
a library browser,
Library
and
browser.
advanced.
Advanced. Because I don't remember seeing that. Yes.
So not in 2.7.
Nice.
So we'll be in 2.8.
2.8 is already out?
No, will be in 2.8.
Oh, okay. I cannot keep up.
Yeah, so the big jump will be,
And when will 2A be out?
I think they were hoping December, but last I checked, there were lots of things breaking
Okay,
other
so
things.
we're gonna update in December, and then it's gonna come out the week after, I'm sure. It's always like that.
Yeah, so maybe it'll be in time, maybe not, in which case,
I wouldn't hope.
over the summer, we'd be able to update. But again, there's only 5,000 out of the 25,000, or there are 30,000 files, but there's so many duplicates. What is the
I know.
actual count?
And I like the one where I add all these problems and then I look at the set and I get all those little pink things, this
Yeah.
problem is the same.
Yes.
So yeah, so there's 25,000 problems that it thinks are distinct in there. But again, we've only been through 5,000 in the library. So in December, we'll probably do more than 5,000 because I think we have more people signed up for our workshop thing. And then, you know, as we go, then more things will have logos and more like this.
So where do you see all the books that they've written problems that they match with? Is that just in the other advanced search?
If you just go to
Yeah,
advanced search,
advanced.
the textbooks definitely
Textbook,
cleaning
yeah.
up, but you can,
That's still a fair number. That's a lot.
so unfortunately, I think some people have not followed the rules, so to speak, of
Yeah.
putting textbooks into their problems. So there are probably books there more than once.
Hmm.
And we've not gone through trying to clean up the textbook
Which one is
tags.
a textbook?
But that's something independent because it's, if someone's going to do that, it's not, you don't have to look at every problem. You can write a script to go through and say every instance of maybe algebra form and function by McCallum is always algebra form and function by McCallum commonly in use Helen. So that a
Yeah.
script can figure out how to make the changes.
Oh, my, there are several versions of that one, aren't there?
Yeah, so we'll close that down like the textbook was.
I don't usually use it, I just wondered where the list was, I forgot it was in the advanced search. All right.
So I think we're over time.
Probably, if there was
Yeah.
one more question, I lost it.
Uh,
Thank you.